Hey there, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Slice of Sports. I'm John Pierson. Erik Dobratz is back again. Good to see you. You know, I see you all the time. And we got another great guest this week, a guy who we've covered sports a lot in this state for a long time, but this guy has us by a bunch. Not to say that he's old or anything like that, but he's a veteran guy, one of our good friends too, Dom Amore of the Hartford Courant. And Dom, great to have you in. I hope I didn't offend you with that introduction.
No. I'm old. There's no way around it. So
You've been around. You've seen a lot in this. I mean, and you're from the state, so this is
44 years.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, does it seem like 44 years?
No, I mean you blink your eyes and it's gone.
Yeah.
I remember Derek Jeter when he was in his last All-Star game after 20 years, and he was telling players, hey, listen, it goes by fast, and he wasn't kidding. It does go by fast.
I mean, is this the life you kind of dreamed of as a reporter, a columnist for the Courant?
Yeah. It took me a long time to make that last step that I wanted to make to be a columnist. But once I got there, I feel like I've shown that I can do it. And but yeah, I'm able to bring all that experience, the aforementioned experience from all those many decades I've been around John. Yeah. I've been able to bring all that to bear in the column.
Well, you look good even after all those decades, Tom. You look great, better than ever.
Well, thank you.
And we enjoy your work. And I know you and Erik were at probably the highlight, event of the season for college basketball in this state. Now, Erik, I'll let you kind of take it from here.
Well, I wanted to. How nice is the three of us grew up in this state, and John and I have talked about it before. Get to cover a lot of the teams we grew up watching, fields we played on.
Yep.
And I don't take it for granted. Last night, Dom, you and I were at the People's Bank Arena watching UConn and St. John's. And I'll be honest, before the game last night, I did kind of look around and say to myself, you know what, I got to appreciate this a little more.
Sure.
Because there's a lot of people that would want to be where you're sitting last night, where I was sitting last night, John, where you sit. Sitting on the floor on my butt, shooting the game's not exactly fun. You got the more luxury spot in the press row. But 16,000 people last night. First, we'll talk about the game. You can roll the highlights if you watch on. Just tell us about your experience last night. It felt like the old times.
It did. And I touched on this the other day. When Dave Gavitt conceived of the Big East, he didn't conceive of a coast-to-coast power conference like the SEC has become or whatever. He conceived of must-watch basketball in the big markets, the big cities, downtown arenas, up and down the East Coast. And that's why you had Hartford, Providence, Boston, Newark, New York, Philly. It read like the Amtrak corridor.
D.C.
D.C. And that's last night, winter night, downtown building full and rocking. That's exactly what Dave Gavitt had in mind back in 1978, and it was kind of recaptured that again. Remember when UConn didn't have Gamble and they played in the old field house last night? That was the showcase, the games that are in Hartford. And Dan was joking after the game that he'd like to get the MSG the tournament out of MSG and maybe somewhere else. And I reminded him the last one that wasn't in Madison Square Garden was in that building.
Yeah, 100%.
Patrick Ewing.
After the game last night, he joked that St. John's has too much of a home advantage now to play the Big East tournament at Madison Square Garden. And of course, he suggested Newark, right?
Yeah,
Mohegan Sun. It was levity. He was having a little fun.
Yeah, and I was going to point out to him that it shouldn't be that way for the Big East final. There'll be plenty of UConn fans there, but I know he's given up swearing for Lent, so I don't want to antagonize.
He pushed it last night a little bit.
Oh yeah,
he dropped an S-bomb last night, slipped it in there.
Yeah, I'm sure by today that maybe he's broken that as well.
I think he meant on camera.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. We'll see how that goes because it is hard editing that sometimes. You got to, we're like, come on, Dan, we're on a crunch. We can't get rid of that F-bomb or this, whatever. But what you saw from last night, you talk about a difference in 1 week. I was at the Creighton game last week when they gave up 90-something points. It was like everyone's like, oh, boy, what's going to go on with this team till last night. Just what a difference a week makes. That performance last night was outstanding.
It was. And, I always marvel at the Big East, particularly because it's a round-robin format. Everybody plays everybody twice. How you could look so overmatched one game and even a couple of weeks later look completely different. And that was a completely different game than what we saw at the Garden 3 weeks ago. And it could not have been just the crowd. And the opposite in terms of the home dynamic, UConn dominated Creighton in Omaha, and then they get dominated here at Gamble of all places. So, coaches make adjustments and matchups change and players get healthier or stronger. This time of year, a lot of players have the flu because it's going around a college campus. You don't necessarily know what you're going to get from one night or one game to the next, and that's why you can't act like the sky is falling when you lose a game, nor can you act like start making parade arrangements off of last night, because they could easily lose to Seton Hall.
Yep.
Well, let's talk about Terrace Reed and his play last night. Terrace Reed Jr. I mean, Dom, Dan said it, if he's going to play like this last night, I mean, their ceiling, and we all said it in the press room last night. That looked like a Final Four team last night.
They did, and the scary thing about last night was UConn was 7 for 25 on threes. What Terrace Reed did gave them a lot of open looks on 3-pointers, which is the idea. If he does that, and then teams can't necessarily get out there and guard Mullins or a Caravan or solo ball the way they sometimes do, I mean, UConn could just devastate teams, especially running their offense. But having him there is a key. They don't really have the two-headed monster at center that they've had, because Erik Raiva, as a freshman, has a ways to go. And you saw last night he really couldn't play very much or very well. But they need Terrace Reed to play that way. And it's been a struggle. By the way, he's had breakout games before, and you think, well, the light's going on, and Hurley's got to him, and he's going to be the Kodiak bear, not the panda bear. We've heard all that before, and it doesn't necessarily last. But now we're going to see, can he sustain it? If he could sustain it for a month and a half, you're right. They could certainly be in the Final Four.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
And Jordans will be giving away a lot of furniture.
Exactly.
I shouldn't mention that.
No free plugs.
If
No
they're
free
not
plugs.
a sponsor,
Come on.
I don't want to mention that.
If Terrace could somehow bottle that for the next 4 weeks or so.
Well, the thing is, when he gets in trouble, and you saw it in the Garden against them, when he starts to kind of flip the ball up there instead of going to the rim with authority. And last night, he went to the rim with a lot of authority.
And Alex Caravan plays his final game in Hartford, and what a career, a remarkable career. Kind of a throwback player in a lot of ways. Here's a guy who spends his whole time in one place, had some opportunities to leave, probably in his best interest to come back. Just what do you make of Alex Caravan as a UConn Husky?
Yeah, I since I'm so old, I'll the guy he reminds me of, not only in his form, but just in the role that he's had with UConn, is Dollar Bill Bradley. Remember?
Yeah.
And he kind of shot the same way, right?
It's an awkward-looking shot.
Right, but he shot the same way, but also that same kind of role on great teams. Mm-hmm. He's one of those guys, maybe he's not the first guy you think of when you think of those 23, 24 teams. Maybe he's not even the first guy you think of with this team if they were to go on into the Final Four. But he's always there. He's a constant. He never misses a game.
The glue guy.
He's a glue guy. He's the ultimate glue guy. And he does remind me a lot of Dollar Bill Bradley.
We can talk for a long, long time about UConn men's basketball. Maybe we will talk a little bit more about it when we come back. But we're going to take a quick break right now. We'll see you back here in just a couple minutes with more Slice of Sports.
All right, you got it.
Back with more Slice of Sports. Dom Amore didn't leave, even though I offended him that he was old.
We're all old.
Erik Dobratz. And you're not old, Dom. You're like a whiz kid. You started really young because you're really good at what you do. Let's talk a little more about the UConn men's basketball program. Also, what also was exciting for me last night, I don't know, the Dan Hurley, Rick Pitino, the villain, the characters. I mean, that just adds to all of this as well.
It does. I remember when they were playing that tournament game and he was at Iona, which started
First round.
And I remember I referred to Pitino as the septuagenarian boogeyman who could ruin UConn's season. And Danny must have read that and picked up on it because he was referring to him as the boogeyman. Well, we beat the boogeyman and now we went on. But yeah, it's interesting. Dave Borges actually pointed this out. Dan always makes a point. He gets all over officials, but he's more of a cheerleader for his players during games.
Yeah.
And Pitino's just the opposite. He rips into his players. I saw that a few times last night, and lays off the officials. So it's an interesting dynamic. But obviously, they're both great coaches. They have different styles, personality-wise, and on the court. Pitino likes that constant pressure. He likes to ratchet up the pressure as the game goes on. But Dan obviously made a lot of adjustments. Dan, this is where he dropped his S-bomb, talking about how adjustments are overrated and they're BS. But the reality is he did something because it was a completely different look against. You really felt after the MSG game that they could not match up with St. John's. and they might lose 3 times to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But he made a lot of adjustments. Obviously.
It was funny with Pitino last night, and John, I'm sure you're the same way. Growing up with all these coaches, the John Thompsons, the Jim Boeheim, Luke Carnesecca, Raleigh, when these guys walk into the building,
different.
And I made it a point last night of following Rick and Dan in when they walked into the building, and Rick came out actually after Dan, so Dan was kind of hovering around waiting for Rick to come out of the tunnel, and I just, I remember when John Thompson came out of the tunnel at the Hartford Civic Center back in the 80s, like everyone boos, and it just brought back a little nostalgia.
One of my first Big East tournaments when I was working for the Milford Citizen, believe it or not, back in the 80s.
Yep.
I remember the program. I was either the program or some ephemera from the tournament had a big cartoon of caricatures of all the coaches in the league in their characteristic poses. Carnesecca in the sweater with Italian gestures and I wish I saved it, and I wish I had it. Jim Calhoun was in there with his palm out. Remember how we used to do this? Yeah. And I wish I had saved it because it was just really encapsulates what the league was about at that time and what it was meant to be at that time.
The coaches were stars.
Yeah, absolutely. John Thompson with the towel. I mean, there's so many. Yeah, so many. Raleigh. There's so many.
Doing this with his hair.
Right.
And everything like that.
Yeah.
And now let's talk some of the younger guy, Braylon Mullins. We were talking a little about him. That's a kid, boy. He doesn't need a lot of time to get that shot off. He's kind of smart. He doesn't play in a hurry. What do you think this kid sticks around? I know there's a lot of talk in the NBA. People like him already.
Yeah. Well, there's 17 NBA scouts there last night, and I'm sure a lot of them were looking at the Reed and Zuby matchup, but I'm sure most were looking at him because he's projected as a lottery pick, a one-and-done pick. The one thing I would say, generally, when you're projected to be a first-round pick, especially lottery or close to it, you go, even if it's 1 year. You don't come back and get hurt. But the math is different now because you have NIL, you've got revenue sharing, and it's possible that UConn could get him enough money, and his father, who's a very smart manager or very good advisor to have in his case, might just say, you could go back to UConn for 1 more year, really get bigger and stronger and develop, and not really lose any money because you could get in the millions to come back, and then go into the draft next year. So I think he's got to really look hard about where he's going to be picked, because I think I'm guessing if Liam McNeely had it to do over again, he might have come back.
Yeah.
So maybe Braylon Mullins comes back.
And I was going to say that, and John, we've talked about this before. These guys, when they leave, Liam McNeely, James Bouknight to some effect, I know he stayed a couple years, but they have no UConn legacy, Dom. If Braylon Mullins leaves this year, they don't win a championship. They don't win a Big East. Say they don't win a Big East tournament championship. What's his UConn legacy going to be if they get they lose in the Sweet 16 or something like that? Liam McNeely has no UConn legacy. James Bouknight's legacy, Dan always refers to him as one of his first big recruits. So I get that he kind of opened the door for him to other players. But does legacy matter to these guys anymore?
Well, legacy doesn't pay the rent, right?
Yeah.
Legacy doesn't buy you a Mercedes-Benz. So, probably not. But again, Steph Castle has a legacy.
Yeah. Won a championship.
He won a championship. And if Braylon wins a championship or goes to Final Four, he'd have a legacy. I don't know. You look at some of those Duke and Kentucky one-and-done guys. They have to some degree a legacy. But let's face it, when you're talking legacy, Alex Caravan, that's a legacy, right? That's the thing. Rudy Gay has a bit of a legacy at UConn.
3 years.
He only played the 1 year. So. Or 2 years, rather. But
was it 2? I don't remember.
Yeah, he played 2.
Talk about legacy. Gino Orema has a legacy. Right?
Heard of that guy.
I heard about it. They're playing and just rolling through opponents.
That is a Sportscaster of the Year level segue right there.
Eric wrote it for me.
Yeah,
that's right.
So,
That's right.
Yeah.
We're a team. We're a team.
Well, you've both won it a few times. Gino. There are times when I look at his career, and I wonder, would he have been better off going somewhere else for another challenge, going and build another school to what he did here?
Right.
But to his credit, he didn't mess with Happy. He liked it here, likes where he lives, wanted to raise his kids here, all of those things. And he stayed here and never got stale, never got bored, never looks bored.
Right.
He's still very much engaged in it. And every bit as good a coach at 72 as he was earlier. He doesn't have to yell and scream to do it, although I imagine he could strike some fear in somebody when he wants to. But it's really a remarkable legacy. And, unless you're very, very young and live to be very, very old, you're never going to see his marks even approached at any point,
And it's almost an, oh, by the way. They're 29-0 and they're a perfect season. They're rolling through the Big East as usual.
Yeah.
And they're probably going to go to another Final Four, and they could win the whole thing in Phoenix. But it's kind of like it's part of our second segment. And if this was anywhere else in the country, it'd be the lead story every night. But we've kind of been there, done that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And, of course, the Big East, it just doesn't provide any real competition for them, nor did the American before that. And they've been able to win despite that. They have been able to avoid, most years at least, getting soft, playing the soft competition. But they've played a lot of ranked teams and beaten them nearly as badly as they've beaten Big East teams. Only Michigan was
Gave
close.
him a scare, right?
And Michigan had to throw in a lot of Michigan was down like 25. Yeah. They had to throw in a lot of circus shots to make it close.
Yeah. Well, so, what they did to Tennessee, it tied at the half and then just run them out of the building.
They just ran them out of the building. So, yeah, I mean, I think they're going to win again, win number 13, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what Gino does. I think it was he denies this or has denied it. I just thinking like I believe he thinks that he would not have wanted to retire 7 or 8 years removed from his last championship. Right. I think he really wanted to get that 12th to prove he could do it in this slightly different era from 2016. Now that he has that, anytime he retires now, it's going to be retiring on top. But does he get a baker's dozen and go out on that? Does he coach till the end of Sarah Strong? Does he have another number one recruit come in and stay there? He drops his little cryptic hints at times, but one thing he's always made very clear is that when he goes, it's not going to be a big farewell tour. It's just going to come out of left field. So that's something that we all, veteran Gino watchers that we are, have to look at.
So we got to watch our inbox in June or July because you never know.
Right, he's going to drive off campus and never turn around.
That's it.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to be back with more of Slice of Sports. Going to talk a little bit more about baseball, Yankees, Red Sox, Mets, and a
book.
Yeah, and a book, and about Dom and his career. Back for one more round of Slice of Sports with Dom Amore. And Dom, I know for years part of the job is covering baseball. You still are a big baseball guy. Yankees, Red Sox, Mets. We're heading into the season. Let's start with the Yankees. Give me kind of the abridged version of what you think they're going to do this year.
Well, the fashionable narrative is that they're just running back what they did last year, and how could they do that? Looking at the offseason, the players available, I don't know what else they could have done. I wouldn't have advocated spending $60 million for Michael Tucker, and what else was there to do? But they're running back a team that won 94 games last year, tied with Toronto. They were really a Max Fried bad start away from maybe winning that series and going on. But, they've got Garrett Cole coming back. They've got a few other guys coming back. And they've got, more importantly, the guys they picked up in the middle of the season that helped will be there for a full season, like Caballero and
Ryan McMahon.
And McMahon, who I think is going to do well in here. So I think they did the right thing running it back. I'd run it back and see they can challenge Toronto. But they're in a really tough division, and that could knock. You're going to have to really play well against good teams to win. Red Sox are also kind of running it back. I mean, they lost Bregman. They did pick up Contreras. But they've got terrific pitching, great starting pitching, and I think they're going to be in the mix. They're going to be a playoff team again. And their destination is going to depend on what they do at the deadline, if they do well. The Mets seems to me like they just changed the culture and the chemistry for the sake of doing it, that they just got rid of players and brought in some new ones to try to change the culture around Soto and Lindor. I don't know if they have the pitching. They're also in a tough division. But I think they will certainly be in contention. And, Steve Cohen will write checks. If they want to pick up somebody at the deadline with a big contract, he can do it.
We were talking about legacy with, UConn players and then Gino, but, Aaron Judge is one. You saw a lot of the pictures of him. If he doesn't win a World Series as a Yankee, where does he stack up? Does he need one to be up there, or is he already
Well, I think he does, especially because I'd hate to see him have to sit on that dropped fly ball for the rest of his life. Mm-hmm. I do hope he gets one for that reason alone. I think he's too good a player for that. But, yes, it's a very different world than it was in the 40s and the 50s when you only had to beat a lot of bad teams to just go right to the World Series. It's different now. You got to get through all these rounds of playoffs. But I do think you need to do it once. And I don't like the narrative that the Yankees have wasted his prime. He's had 8 or 9 chances to do it. Mm-hmm. But he's got to take over a postseason the way we saw Vlad Guerrero take it over, the way we've seen Freddie Freeman take it over. He's got to do that and win. And then I think then he'll have no unfinished business. Paige Becker's needed a championship.
Dom, you wrote a book, another book, More Than a Game. I got a copy of it right here. There it is, right there, with Coach Calhoun. See that? We got a couple of them for you. First of all, you got to give us a couple plugs. You're going to be signing some books with Coach. Tell me about that.
Yeah, the book's been out since the fall, and it's doing very well received. And we're going to be in Manhattan the first day of the Big East tournament. UConn won't be playing that day.
Yep.
So if you're in Manhattan milling around and you don't want to go watch the first round games, come on down to Barnes & Noble on 5th Avenue, 555 5th Avenue. We'll be there from noon to 2 on March 11th. And we have an event on Selection Sunday during the day at the Bushnell. We're going to do a little book talk and a meet and greet and signing there. You can register for that at the Bushnell, and you can go to barnesandnoble.com for information on the 11th. But come on down to those things. We have a few more things coming up. Jim, you've seen him. Can't get enough. Loves talking to people, meeting people, telling his stories, signing, taking pictures. He loves doing all that. So if you have an opportunity to meet Jim and you haven't, come on down and do it.
And folks, when Jim Calhoun wants to write a book, he reaches out to Dom. When he wants to do a book, you're his guy. So you deserve a lot of credit for that, Dom, because he doesn't mess around. He went to you with this idea, right?
Yeah, after Lee Montville turned him down because it was he did. He couldn't get one Notre Dame West Haven grad, so he went to Plan B, and that was me. But it's funny. I only covered him his last year. I didn't start covering UConn until 2011, so I only covered him his last year. So maybe I didn't have time to really alienate him and tick him off. So.
But he reads the papers and he likes you.
Yeah,
he does read the papers.
He recognizes great work, and I can't wait to crack this thing open because knowing the both of you, this is going to be a fun read.
It's different than it's not a memoir. It's not his life story.
Yeah.
It's a different approach, and I think you'll like it.
Well, writing books, when we get into this career, we all dream big. Was this part of a dream when you first started thinking, I want to, be a journalist, a writer, whatever your original dream was?
Well, I wish you had this clip somewhere. But, when I was 8 years old, I kind of got fascinated by watching the Odd Couple series. And if you remember, Jack Klugman played the sports writer Oscar Madison. And in the main opening sequence of the show, he would get out of a cab and just fling the money in the passenger side window, and then turn around and walk away puffing a cigar. As an 8-year-old, I was slayed by that, thinking about what a great life, what a carefree, cool guy. That's I want to live like that. And then of course later on, my father would take me to Yankee Stadium, and I would look up at the press box and say, "Well, those guys get to come here all the time. Boy, that's what I'd like to do." My father wanted me to work in the post office, but I said no. I want to be a sports writer, and I never really wanted to do anything else.
Yeah, kind of like we said in the beginning, sitting at that game last night, Dom.
Sure.
It's all we all wanted. That's why we're in this business. Yeah. It has its bumps and then the road, obviously, with the way the business has changed. But there's nothing better than being at the game. I think when I realized that a pro career was out of the reach when I was about 10 or 12, what's the next best thing? The access, being in the locker room.
Yeah, I think a lot of sports writers will say it. There's probably a dozen or so days out of the year when you just would not want to be anywhere else on earth.
Yeah.
And those days keep you coming back.
Tom, do you remember the moment that you realized you were made for the business? Because you're grinding and you're hustling. You're like, is it worth it? But do you remember the moment where you're like, you know what, I'm pretty good at this, and I think I really want to keep pushing forward 40 some odd years later?
It was probably the year when I covered the NIT for the Milford Citizen in 1988, and the Citizen was an afternoon paper. Those are long extinct. So I'd have to come in at 4:00 in the morning, and to start to put out the paper as a staff of one, and I went and I covered the championship game at the Garden, and you almost went right from there to the office in Milford to put it out. But I was just so exhilarated by that, and that's probably when eventually I started out covering high schools for a lot of years, which we all do, and at some point I said, if I'm going to do this, I want to cover big time stuff. And I I got the opportunity to cover the Giants for the Courant in 1992, and that's when I did my first Super Bowl that year, and that's when I knew I was going to do it forever.
Yeah.
Was when I made that key jump from high schools to an NFL beat.
Super Bowls, World Series, Final Fours. It really has been a great career and a great life. How much longer do you want to do it? We've got to be quick because we've got to wrap this up.
Yeah, well, I turn 64 next week, so certainly one more year I hope to do it. And then after that, I'll just take it, day by day and see how long. Hopefully I'm in good health as I am now, and hopefully they still want me, and I'm still enjoying it. I'll keep doing it beyond that, but certainly one more year.
Hopefully I have 2 more Final Fours ahead of us in this spring. That'd be nice.
Well, I certainly wouldn't bet against it at this point.
Dom, thanks for the time. Thanks for the great work, and thanks
Get the book,
for the
folks.
book.
Get the book.
There you go.
Right.
More than a game. Dom Amore, Hartford Courant. Appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us on Slice of Sports. Erik, you want to say anything else?
No, it's just a pleasure. Dom is one of those people, folks. You're really grateful to know in the field.
And not only that, I'm always available.
That's right.
Always available. All right,
in the neighborhood, always available.
That's going to do it for us. Appreciate you watching us. We'll see you back here next week.